Hi, welcome to the 2023 Head of the Charles Volunteer Orientation. My name is Kate Broderick, and I am one of this year's co-chairs of the race committee. So today we're going to be going through a few things. We'll give you some background on the regatta, some more information about volunteering. We'll walk through the course and some key landmarks, give you some tips on preparing for your shift, as well as expectations and our volunteer code of conduct. And we will finish up with some frequently asked questions. So to give you some background on the regatta, the Head of the Charles is the largest three-day rowing race in the world. It began in 1965. The first race was run on October 16th and has included both men and women since its founding. One thing that we get a lot of questions about is why is it called a head race? So the name originated based on the Head of the River Regatta in London, which was first run in 1926. So the Head of the Charles then became the first United States head race in 1965. The racing works a little bit differently than a lot of rowing racing. So rather than having multiple boats line up and kind of all go off the line at once, boats cross the start line at the Boston University Boathouse about once every 15 seconds. And so they're racing against the clock. We do what we can to keep this interesting, but ultimately the times are decided and the finish order is decided after everyone in the race has completed the race. So you can oftentimes have folks who maybe cross the line last and there's the start line last in their division actually win the event if they have the fastest time down the course. This year, a little bit different than 1965. We are expecting over 11,700 athletes representing 25 countries. They'll be racing down the Charles in 2,600 boats, representing over 800 clubs, obviously from all over the world, in 75 different events. And we will have over 2,000 volunteers on site both race weekend and in the weeks leading up to the regatta, helping us pull all of it off. So volunteering at the Head of the Charles, first of all, on behalf of the regatta, I want to say thank you for all of you who are so generously giving your time to help us pull off this huge feat and, really create a wonderful weekend for our athletes and for our community. So since its founding, the HOCR has been a volunteer run event, and we take that really seriously, and it's a real point of pride. While professional staff have been added over the years for some of those jobs that were just a bit too onerous for volunteers, the volunteer staff collaborate very closely with the professional staff as well as the board of directors to make strategic decisions about the regatta. So, kind of keep that in mind while you're on site, that the feedback that you provide to your race ops co-chairs and to the race committee is taken really seriously and is considered, kind of the top brass of the regatta. So without all of you, the Head of the Charles certainly would not be possible. Just a little background on the volunteer organizational structure. This is really informational. It's not going to have any bearing on your on-site operations, but the Head of the Charles consists of 26 different race operations committees, which you can see listed in the white box below. These committees are led by a group of co-chairs who collaborate with the race committee and with the HOCR office to execute all their various responsibilities. The race committee, the office, and the race operations co-chairs actually plan year-round, and starting the first Tuesday after Labor Day, meet weekly to ensure we're all ready to go for race weekend. So let's take a walk down the course. Hopefully this will be helpful, particularly if you're coming from out of town. So what we have here to kind of orient you is an overhead map of the race course. The start line you can kind of see in the lower right hand, sort of right above that graphic at the bottom that says Head of the Charles. So that's the start line at the Boston University Boathouse. And then, as you can see, it's very curvy river, which can create some interesting circumstances when we have three boats trying to make it through one bridge arch. But the race runs 3 miles from that start line over to the finish line, which you can kind of see by that large A that says, Herder Park, athlete staging and retail. That's the finish area launch site, or falls. So that's, kind of the overhead shot. On the lower half, kind of below the river, is Boston. Above the river is Cambridge. So because the river is so windy, if you are not familiar with the area, it can get a bit disorienting whether you're in Boston or Cambridge. So depending on what your responsibilities are, pay careful attention to where you're being posted. Race operations stretch the whole course. Obviously, there's a lot of committees working on the river in launches, river control, first aid. So there's a lot of activity on the water. And then on both sides of the river, Boston and Cambridge, we have volunteers throughout the course. So kind of zooming in on the first mile. So this includes the MIT Boathouse. These are all on the Cambridge side, the MIT Boathouse, the Boston University Boathouse, and Riverside Boat Club. Starting with MIT, which is actually downstream of the start line. There's a lot of launches, river control activity there, some first aid. Boston University, their boathouse, they're kind enough to let us sort of take over. We have the start line operating there, timing, umpires, first aid, kind of you name it. If it has to do with boats going down the river, it's probably going on at the Boston University Boathouse. And then moving upriver a little bit farther is Riverside Boat Club, which for those of you who have raced the Charles, this is the first timing station. So the first kind of point when you'll see times for boats racing down the river. Also included in here, which is marked with the number 6, is Saddle, or the singles and doubles launch site. That's, its own committee in and of itself. It's a bit smaller than the finish area launch site. Not quite as many athletes are boating out of there, and they're all in small boats, but a very important piece of the operation nonetheless. Now going on to the second mile, only 2 boathouses here, both Harvard Women's Boathouse, which is called the Weld Boathouse. That is on the Cambridge side of the Lars Anderson Bridge. And then the other Harvard Boathouse, Harvard Men's Boathouse, which is closer to the left side of this box, on the Boston side is the Newell Boathouse. Also in here, marked by the number 4, is the Reunion Village. And then along the riverbank next to the Weld Boathouse is the Weld Exhibition. And then coming through the final mile to the finish line, this whole kind of outlined area, starting at the top of that turn all the way down past the finish line, is more or less all falls, or the finish area launch site. So this is the final mile of the race. The vast majority of athletes are racing from here. The vast majority of boats are parked here. This is also where kind of all of the rowing vendors are located. So there's a lot of commercial activity here, a lot of athlete activity here. We also have some hospitality activity, the Elliott Bridge enclosure, as well as the Head of the Charles Director's Tent and the Cambridge Boat Club. The Director's Tent and the Cambridge Boat Club are both kind of on the left side of your screen, near where that blue and white burgee are. They're on the Cambridge side. So you can see how it can get a bit disorienting with that kind of U-bend in the river. But for a lot of volunteers, you're going to be focused here, kind of near where that number 1 is. That we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's also where you will check in to the volunteer tent and pick up your premium that's true for the majority of volunteers. If your co-chairs for your committees have told you differently, some committees do have different instructions. You should follow those, but the majority of volunteers will pick up their jackets around that number 1. So getting ready for your shift. So we have some shots here of our very loyal volunteers over the years. Thinking about planning for your arrival. So taking a step back, these are long shifts. Most of you are going to be, if not entirely outdoors, somewhat outdoors. We are doing our best to keep everybody comfortable, but it's an outdoor event. It's fall in New England. Things can change really quickly. It's also a really big footprint that we're working on. So working with your committee co-chair to ensure that you know exactly where and when you are supposed to arrive is really critical. Traffic can be really bad. There's road closures along Memorial Drive. There's very, very limited parking. So work with your co-chair. Depending on where you are, your circumstances are going to be different, but work with them to understand what the best way is to get where you need to go, and be sure to give yourself some extra time. Be very careful about the weather. Pay careful attention to what it's doing. Things can change really quickly. Our best advice is to dress in layers, bring extra layers. You know, it's so important to be comfortable, and also ensure that you're wearing good footwear. Even if it's dry regatta weekend, if it rained in the days and weeks before, it can be really muddy. So bear that in mind. As I mentioned, travel can be tough during regatta weekend. Oftentimes a lot of the universities around town are also having their parents' weekends that same weekend. So the whole city can be really congested. So just be sure to pay attention to that, and collect your premium if necessary and get to your post in time. If you are volunteering with a friend or a family member, please remember you both need to come to the volunteer tent to pick up your premiums, and you both need a government ID to get them. If you're volunteering with your spouse or a sibling, you cannot go and say like, oh, I need to pick up my wife's premium. You will not get it. She will need to go on her own to pick it up. So more on collecting your premium. These are, such a gift from our apparel sponsor, Vineyard Vines. They're lovely. They're really well made. But because they do tend to be really desirable, we have to be really careful about distributing them to make sure that everyone who is owed one gets one, and people aren't double dipping or what have you. So a government issued ID is required to pick up the premium. The premiums will not be distributed without proper ID. This is not a loosey-goosey operation. So I would very much discourage you from trying to go over there without some kind of government issued ID. And as I mentioned, you cannot pick up anyone else's premium but your own. The volunteer tent, which is kind of circled in red on that map there, it's in the finish area launch site. The best sort of, if you were to use Uber or what have you, GPS address, 1075 Soldiers Field Road will kind of get you pretty close to where you need to be. You're going to get dropped off on the road. You're going to have to walk towards the river. The 10 hours are Friday, the 20th from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday, the 21st from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday, the 22nd from 6 a.m. to noon. If you're having any issues, if you're confused about where you need to go, if you are unsure how long it might take you to get from the volunteer tent to your post, I really encourage you to check in with your co-chair before the regatta so you can hammer out those details. Things to think about. Can't emphasize this enough, and we're so grateful for your time, but these are really long days. Lunches will be provided, but if you need snacks, if you need medication, just be sure to really think through what you might need during the day so that you can stay comfortable. There will be water on site in mostly in the falls area. So, if you're working for umpires and you're going to be posted on a bridge somewhere, think about water, etc. Again, the regatta is going to do what it can to keep you comfortable, but we're covering 3+ miles on two sides of the river. So it's important to do what you need to do for yourself to make sure you're going to be comfortable. Valuables. There is no secure place to store your valuables. So we really encourage you to leave those at home. Illness and emergencies, things happen, people get sick. If something comes up and you are not able to make it, please contact your race ops co-chair as soon as possible. We do not overstaff these volunteer shifts. We work really hard to make sure that we have the exact right number of volunteers so everyone is able to pitch in and nobody feels like they're just kind of sitting around. So when we lose somebody, it can be a bit of a scramble. So the more notice that we get, the more we're able to prepare. So that would be greatly appreciated. All right, expectations and code of conduct. So this was, put together by our board of directors, and it's really common sense, but we do expect our volunteers to conduct themselves in a manner that demonstrates a friendly, responsible, welcoming, and respectful representation of the head of the Charles. For a lot of our athletes, our volunteer corps are their experience of the head of the Charles and of the organization. We ask you that you treat everyone fairly, regardless of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, political belief, or economic status. Respect the dignity of the competitors and all other volunteers, and refrain from any public criticism of the competitors or other volunteers. We also ask that you refrain from use of profane, insulting, harassing, or otherwise offensive language while volunteering, as well as abstaining from the use of drugs, alcohol, and tobacco products before or during your shift. We ask that you abide by the instructions and guidelines given to you by your head of the Charles Committee co-chair, and that you report any incident to the HOCR office that might be contrary to these standards of conduct. Any volunteer who violates the code of conduct may lose the opportunity to volunteer for future head of the Charles regattas. So we do take this really seriously. Again, for a lot of our athletes, their kind of one interaction with the regatta is at the dock or on the water. So it may just be one of 11,000 athletes to a volunteer, but for the athlete, this is the one head of the Charles official that they're interacting with. So we take that really seriously, and we try and provide the best possible experience to the athletes, as well as to your kind of co-volunteers and to the community. A lot of folks from the community will be there. It's a very busy weekend for anyone who has attended in the past. So we try and keep it fun and positive for everybody who's attending. What to do in case of emergency. So there are first aid stations located along the course, which can provide first aid care and collaborate very, very closely with kind of the professional emergency services. So fire, police, ambulance, etc. If you do not know where a first aid station is, or you are not near one, call 911 and be sure to make note of where you are, kind of going back to the map of the river, especially if you aren't from the area. Be sure to make that you know where you are on the course in case you are in a position where you need to call in an emergency. If you are in a situation where you have a found child, so a child who's been separated from his or her parents, or you have found parents who are looking for a child, contact your race ops co-chair or take to a first aid station. They will kind of work with the police, etc., to make sure that that family is reunited. So at the end of the day, 911 will always work, but there our first aid station staffed by Head of the Charles Volunteers up and down the course, kind of more concentrated in high volume areas, falls, Cambridge Boat Club, etc. So be sure to kind of be mindful of where those are, and make use of their services if you need them. Frequently asked questions. Can my friend volunteer too? By the time we get to race weekend, the race ops co-chairs have gone to great pains to staff their committees, and we really cannot take anybody weekend of. So bringing someone kind of to the volunteer tent and asking if there's a job for them, the answer to that almost invariably is going to be no. We're so grateful for their interest, but we don't want them to feel like their time has been wasted. So just kind of setting expectations. But as a reminder, volunteer registration opens in August every year, so would love to have them sign up for the next year's regatta. I put my premium down and it was stolen. Can I get a new one? No. We do not have surplus premiums. They're a benefit from our sponsor, and we work with them to make sure that we're not over ordering. So each volunteer is allocated one premium. They, especially during the weekend, are very popular items. I cannot tell you how many of these have been stolen when somebody left it on a chair, left it laying on a table, whatever. So we just don't have enough to replace it and to still be able to meet kind of our commitment to all of the other volunteers who are coming maybe the next day, et cetera, to pick theirs up. So please be very careful with it. Sometimes we have these beautiful warm weekends and it's a jacket or a vest or whatever, and you don't need to wear it. Just please put it in a bag, put it somewhere safe, so that it doesn't walk away. Can I come early to get my premium? Yes, you may pick up your premium the day before, days before. As a reminder, the 10 opens on Friday starting at 6 a.m. So you can't pick it up before your shift starts, but we really do expect you to show up to your shift. As I mentioned, we really are relying on you. We are very careful to not overstaff. So we really ask that you show up, even if it's, for your schedule and depending on where you're stationed, maybe it makes sense to pick the premium up early. Can I get a leftover premium for a friend? No. All of our premiums do have a good home that they're allocated to. As I mentioned, we really do not budget for extras, because again, they're a really nice benefit, and so we try not to take advantage of it and try to just order the ones that we need. So no leftovers, unfortunately. But that brings us to the end of volunteer orientation. Again, we are so grateful that you're going to be joining us on site. As you're thinking about preparing for the regatta, if you have questions that you're not sure where they should go, you can always email volunteer@hocr.org if you need assistance. But your best kind of resource for information is going to be your race ops co-chairs, and they should be in touch with everything that you'll need kind of going into your shift. So with that, thank you all so much for your time, and we're so excited to see you next weekend.